If the creative principle is non-material, then it must have been before the beginning of the universe, before time itself. This is not such a hard concept to understand. When you dream at night, you find yourself in all sorts of situations and doing all sorts of things without your physical body. You really don't notice the passing of time. So let's go back in time before the beginning of the universe. I want you to pretend that you were conscious before there were atoms, or bodies, or planets, or stars, or galaxies. Before time itself. Imagine that you're a timeless being, complete within yourself. Since there's nothing to look at, you're aware of nothing outside yourself, yet you feel a sense of complete fulfillment. Sort of like floating on a completely calm ocean, in a perfect state of serenity. If nothing existed at all, how would you begin the creative process? You're just hanging out, and it's really boring because there's nothing to play around with. You've got no toys, no games, and no friends. You're like a newborn baby. You have no idea of physics or chemistry, or what a planet looks like, or even what an atom looks like, because they haven't been invented yet. Suddenly, you have an idea. Has that ever happened to you? You're just sitting there and all of a sudden something pops into your head. Boom. What happens? You've just created the first thought. First thought is an unimaginably tiny little vibration or packet of energy, but even so, it's perfectly real to you. Just like in a dream when you imagine something and it's real. For simplicity's sake, we'll call it a particle, the most basic quanta of energy in the universe. We're going to give you a personality because, after all, you are conscious, and conscious beings have personalities. Let's call this personality Hal. Hal is a conscious being, you, who just doesn't happen to have a body, because bodies haven't been invented yet. We'll say that Hal is a him. Of course, consciousness doesn't have gender, only physical bodies have gender, but in order to make things easier, we give Hal a gender. The ladies might decide to call Hal something nicer, like Hallie or Halo. Hal, through the creative magic of the animating principle, has broken through the subtle barrier between pure creative potential and something physical. Hal stares in wonder at what he has created. At first, he doesn't really know how he did it, so he tries again, and voila! Hal now has two particles in the universe. The first thing Hal notices is that the two particles are ever so slightly different from each other. Why is that? Because in order for there to be two separate particles, each must be unique. Otherwise, they will be the same particle and occupy the same space. Hal also notices that the space between particles isn't empty. Each of the particles is cradled within a subtle, glowing energy that surrounds them and occupies the space between them. Hal realizes that the two particles change their relationship to each other, creating movement. Hal feels affinity for his particles because each one is his own thought. Hal understands that in its own way, each particle is alive. Even so, there is an undeniable individuality to each of them that just emphasizes Hal's own awareness of himself as separate from them. Here we have the basic quandary of a physical universe. Separation. Hal understands that just as his two particles can move relative to each other, he has the capability of moving to each particle and looking outward from that particle to the other. Now Hal is really having fun. Hal's created the universe's first game. Hal isn't really moving, of course. He's simply being through the power of his own intention. This is what Richard Bach calls perfect speed. Hal wants to look through particle A, and like magic, he's there, just as we do when we dream. He does the same with particle B. In a mind-blowing realization, Hal comprehends that he has complete freedom to be anywhere he wants. Hal also sees that the scenery looks different depending upon where he is. Hal is learning viewpoint and perspective. Hal is now experiencing something totally new, the feeling of freedom. Hal understands that freedom is generated from limitation, for without its two limited particles, the idea of freedom is not possible. Infinity, therefore, is dependent on finiteness. Let's say Hal decided he didn't like the second particle. He says, I want to destroy that particle. What happens? Well, the very act of thinking the thought, I want to destroy that particle, creates another particle. Now there are three particles. Hal is astonished. Why can't I get rid of particle 2, Hal says. That thought, of course, immediately creates a fourth particle. After several dozen attempts, Hal has a veritable zoo of particles all dancing around each other. Hal laughs and understands that a creator can only create. Hal realizes that destruction is an impossibility. Hal now understands that expansion is inevitable. Here we have the genesis for great wisdom. Wise ones throughout history have understood that to resist something is to make it bigger. That is why successful people concentrate only on the creation of what is wanted and never on the destruction of what is not wanted. In an expanding universe, contraction is only an apparency. Something that diminishes is just changing form, like the log that burns and turns its energy into heat.